Pipes transform and validate data before it reaches route handlers. It ensures input data is properly formatted and meets the required criteria. Pipes also intercept requests, and there are two primary uses: to transform data, for example to convert 32 string to 32 number, and to validate data, for example if a field has the minimum length of 8. NestJs comes with 9 built-in transformation pipes ready to use. The names are self-explanatory, but if you want to pause the video to read what they all do, feel free to do so. Let's code some transformation pipes. If you go to the dogs controller, on the route handler of the find one, we have some problems. One of those problems is, if I try to give an ID that is not a number, for example my name, it will say dog not found. Of course, because it's not a number, we need to validate if it's a number. But we also have another problem. Here in the ID, we are saying it's a string and then adding the plus sign to convert it to a number. What happens if I say it's a number, but I don't convert it? Let's refresh and try to search a dog with ID 1. If I search for it, it still says resource not found, but if I get all dogs, it's clearly here, the dog with the ID 1. So how do we fix this? It's pretty simple. Next to the ID, inside the parameter, you can add the parse int pipe and import it, and that's it. Now if I try to get the dog with ID of 1, it will let me, and if I try to get a dog with an ID of my name, which makes no sense, it will say validation failed, numeric string is expected. And Diogo is not a numeric string, it's just a string. We should do this for every ID. I'm going to copy here and use it in the update and in the delete. Another thing you might want is, instead of having the status code of 400, you might want to change the status code for some reason. And you can do that by creating a new instance, saying new, and inside it, of an object, you say error HTTP status code, and say your HTTP status dot, and you choose wherever you want. I'm going to say not acceptable. And now, instead of 400 and bad request, if I try to get a dog by my name, I get 406 and general error. But why do I get general error? This was made on purpose, because on the last episode we used our custom filter and we don't have the not acceptable case. So it's defaulting to general error. Let's add the not acceptable case. Not acceptable. And instead of not acceptable, I'm going to say wrong format. Now if I save this and try to do the get request again, I will get wrong format instead. All the other transformation pipes work pretty similar. Instead of using the parse int pipe, I can use the parse float pipe and import it, and it will still work the same. If I try to get a dog with my name, I still get the same thing, and if I try to get a dog with the ID 1, it still works because it's still being converted to a number. Parse float works because integers work with float. There are many others like the parse boolean, which converts a boolean in string to an actual boolean. You get the point of it. Every time you want to transform some type of data, you use a transformation pipe. And let's not forget to change this string to number and remove the plus sign. But there is actually one more pipe worth showing, which is the default pipe. Open the dog service, and let's say instead of 2 dogs, we have 10,000 dogs. I am not going to create 10,000 dogs of course, but I created this array with 22 dogs, and you can copy it in the description. And go to the dog interface and add the birthdate property. And you can close it. Now let's think of the following. If I try to get all dogs, I get this huge list. 10,000 dogs, let's say. It's bad because imagine the huge payload, the bad performance, and the awful user experience. We should have a limit. Let's add a limit in the server. I'm going to close this giant array. Here in the find all, I'm going to add a limit, which is of type number. And here, instead of this.dogsDB, I'm going to use slice from 0 to limit. Now in the controllers, we need to add a limit query. I'm going there, and where I am using the find all, I'm going to add a limit, which will be a query. Add query and import it if it's not already imported. Limit, which is of type number as well. I can now get all dogs and I will still get them. But if I say where limit equals a random number like 3, it's already here, 3, then I try to do the get and I only get 3. But as you know, queries are optional. What if a user doesn't send a query at all? It will still give the 10,000 dogs. That is where the default pipe comes in. Here in the dogs controller, where we are using the limit, we can create a new instance of the default pipe and import it, and inside it give whatever number you want it to default to. I'm going to say 5 and save. Now if I try to get all dogs with the limit of 3, I will still get 3, but if I don't give a limit at all, instead of returning all supposedly 10,000 dogs, I only get 5, which is the default I put here. You can do this in another way. Instead of writing the new default pipe or whatever transformation pipe you want inside the query, the parameter, wherever you want, you can import the use pipes, and inside here you use it. You can still see it works the same. I'm going to request all dogs and I still get the 5 dogs. But there is a problem to this. If you add an offset, for example, which is also a number, the offset number and the limit number will both be defaulted to 5 because this is outside the route handler. And you can also add outside the controller and everything will be defaulted to 5, which I don't think it's a good idea. I'm going to let it stay here. Let's say we need the functionality where you get a dog ID, but you not only send his ID, but you also send his birthday date, and it tells you if you got it correct or not. There are no built-in pipes to validate dates. I can't come here and say parse date pipe. It doesn't exist. We need to create a custom pipe for that. Let's go to our dog service, and here in the find one, let's add the date, which is going to be a string for now. Now let's add some logic to check if we got the date right or wrong. For that, I'm going to say if the user sends a date, because it's going to be a query, which is optional, then let's transform the date it was sent to an actual date using new date, const input date equals new date. And here you put the date that the person sent, and we can copy this, but instead of input date, it will be the actual dog birth date, which will come from dog.birthdate. And to check if they match, const isMatch, it doesn't matter the name. Let's go with the dog birthdate dot get time and check if it's strictly equal to the input date dot get time. And that's it, logic done. Now let's do a console log based on that condition. Meaning, if isMatch, which is if it's true, then I'm going to say you got it right. And if it's false, I'm going to say how don't you know? Let's now go to the DOS controller and add the birthday. Here, I'm going to add birthday. I'm going to call it bday to be a shorthand. And here, I'm going to say query is going to be bday. And bday is going to be of type string for now. Let's test this. I get a dog with an ID of 1, and this is the birth date, 2019. I'm going to copy it, and I'll say where bday equals and the date. And as you can see, I get console logged, you got it right. Let's do a wrong date. And we get, how don't you know? But I can still give a non-date. I can say rice, and it will say, how don't you know? So we don't have a way to know if it is an actual date or not, which is the same problem we had before we added the parse int pipe. And we are not even validating if the date exists at all, if it's a valid date. Let's now create a folder for pipes in the source folder, pipes, and inside I'm going to create a parse date.pipe.ts. A pipe is a class that I'm going to name it parse date pipe, which implements the pipe transform interface and import it. If you control or command click on the pipe transform, you can see the interface, which is this one, the transform with a value and the metadata. I'm going to copy it and paste it inside. Then remove this and open it. The value is the type. In our case, it's a string. We are going to send a string. And the argument metadata, import it. The final result of our transformation is going to be a date. It's time to create the logic. Let's check if the string is able to be converted into a date or not. For that, I'm going to create a const, which I'm going to call it date, and it will receive a string and return a boolean. This boolean will say if the string can be a date or not. Let's create our function, and let's transform, just like we did in the service, the date using new date, and we pass the value, which is this value right here. And let's use the isNone to check if the date.getTime is a number or not. In our case, we want to check if it is a number, so we need to invert the is not a number to become a is a number. For those who don't know, getTime, if it's an actual date, it will return a number, for example 730, etc. Let's do the error handling, if it's not a date, and here we will pass the value that comes from the transform this time, and I'm going to throw, instead of an HTTP exception, there is another one which is the bad request exception right here, and I'm going to say invalidate. Otherwise, I'm going to transform the value using new date, and we are not going to use metadata for this, so you can comment this, just know it exists. It's done, our custom pipe is finished. I'm going to close it, and here in the docs controller, I can finally say, instead of a string, it's a date, and next to bdate, I can import the parse date pipe, the one we just created. Now I get a message here saying date is not assignable to parameter of type string, because we also need to change here in the dog service. In the dog service now, instead of string, it's date. And the best part is we now don't need to convert the date into a date because we already have a custom pipe for it. I can delete this, and instead of saying input date, I simply say date, and hopefully it will work. Let's check. I'm going to say the same thing, birthday equals rice. See, it works. I get an invalid date and a bad request, because rice is not a date. Let's now don't give a birthday at all, so we know the dog's birthday. I now have a problem, which is if I give dogs 1 without the birthday, it says invalid date. Here I can say it's optional, but this is only for TypeScript. The thing I found was if I come to the parse date, I need to say if the person doesn't send the value, then let's return undefined. And now this will work. If I do a dog/1 and I get it, there you go. I'm going to close this and let's test. I have 2019 and I'm going to copy and say where bday equals that. Now I get you got it right. Let's do a wrong date. I get you don't know. Let's do a date that doesn't exist, for example the day 40, and let's try to get, and there you go, invalid date. Even though this is almost a date format, it manages to get even the wrong days or the wrong months, and your first custom pipe is done. To recap, our custom pipe implements the pipe transform. We get a value and convert it to some other value, or throw an exception if that value is impossible to be converted. Then here in the dog controllers, we use it like any other pipe, and that's it. We now have learned how to use pipes to validate and transform what we send in an URL and create our own custom pipes, but we haven't learned how to validate what we send on a body. For example, if I do a get all dogs, you can see the age is 4, but I can change the age to something that is not a number. I can say edit the dog 1, and instead of 4, I'm going to add a string, and inside say my name. And it worked. Now the age is my name. This shouldn't be possible. You should be able to validate and force types. For that, you need to install the following. Let's npm install class validator and also install the class transformer. It's already installed. Okay, the server restarted, and now we should have access to what we installed. Here in the DTO, go to update dog, because this is the DTO we are using for the patch. We created this in a previous episode. You can now use decorators to validate, but these decorators will come from the class validator package we installed. This is the thing I enjoy doing the most. Let's create our first one called isOptional. Another thing we might want is to check if the age is a number, so I can send Diogo like I sent in a string. The decorator is called isInt and import it. Another one is the minimum, where I can say I don't want an age below 0, because it doesn't make sense to have negative numbers. And let's say also a max. Let's say dogs can't have a maximum, they don't go over 30 years sadly, okay? And import the max. I can use the isOptional for the breed and for the isGoodBoy, because nothing in an update is required, as we know. And let's check if it is a string, is string, and import it. And also check if it is a boolean, is boolean, and import it. And we are almost done. To call this, we can't just try the route, we need to do one thing first, which is in the docs controller, before the controller, so everything has access to it, you can say use pipes, and here you call the validation pipe. Don't forget to add the new. Let's try once again to do the age of a string. See, you now get bad request exception because you can send a string, but if I say the age is now 5, it would let me. The same thing with everything else. If I say the age is above 30, which is what we set, I'm going to say 31, it will say pet request. And there we go, we have validation using custom decorators from the class validator package. I challenge you now to go to the other DTO, which is the create dog DTO, and add your own validators, wherever you think you might need. I will wait for you to do it by yourself, and then you can check how I did it. And this is how I did it. I used isNotEmpty for everything, because when you add a dog, everything is required. And then the basic stuff we did with the update dog, the isInt, the minimum, the max. So we have the same conditions both on the update dog DTO and on the create dog DTO. And the last thing on this episode is, we used a validation pipe on this controller, but validation pipe should be used globally. I'm going to remove it from here and open the main file, and right below the use global filters, I'm going to use global pipes with our new validation pipe. And I have an error on the controller because I need to remove it from the imports. Let me now try to do a request with something that is a string, and I still get an exception. But if I do with a number, I don't. But this time, the validation pipe is used globally.